Hello everyone, and thank you again for waiting. We're going to go ahead and get started now on our Mastering MarketSight webinar, Managing Waves of Data by Utilizing MarketSight's Append function. My name is Anne Schafer. For those of you who haven't spoken with me or emailed me, I am the Senior Customer Success Specialist here at MarketSight. We'll be, of course, answering questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to send those in through the chat. If we're not able to answer your question on the webinar, or perhaps it may be too specific to a particular project, we'll certainly follow up with you by email afterwards. So again, please do feel free to send those questions in and we'll make sure that you get follow-up on those. All right, excellent. So in terms of today's webinar, we'll be taking a look at a couple of different functions of Append here. We're going to be looking at adding new respondents, which is especially handy for, again, those waves of data when we are, say, running a tracking study, new respondents come in. Rather than upload an entirely new data set, you could simply add those new respondents to your pre-existing data set. And of course, all of the work that you've done, all of the crosstabs and all of the charts and dashboards can then update. We'll be covering different areas of that, so things like our automatic matching rules, different tips and tricks for Append, as well as covering the related features like PowerPoint Sync. We'll also be taking a look at adding new variables to the data set through the Append function, including things like utilizing a matching variable or a unique identifier, and deciding between Append versus upload and import of data, which is the better approach. All right, so switching back into MarketSight here. One of the things that you will, of course, have when you are working in MarketSight is a data set that you've uploaded to your account. When you're looking to begin appending data, you're generally going to begin on the datasets page with that data set selected. There are a couple of things to be aware of. You have two options to begin the process. One is either a right-click, Append Data, or if you have the data set selected, you'll see Append Data up here in the gray toolbar as well. The first thing you'll definitely want to know once you begin the wizard here is that the append process is never going to overwrite your original file. There's a note here, in fact, to that effect on the main page of this wizard. So you're never overwriting, destroying, deleting, or modifying this original data set that you uploaded. It's always going to make a copy of that file, upload the new data, and then create a combined data set from that. So definitely very important there, especially if this is the first time you've done Append. You don't really have to worry too much because, again, you can always go back to start if you think something may be incorrect. However, one thing to keep in mind, as a result of the fact that it is creating a new combined file, you'll want to keep an eye on the amount of space that you have available in your account. The amount of space remaining, in my case, this is about 9 gigabytes here, that needs to be enough to accommodate both the size of the original data set that was already uploaded and the new data set as well. So you need to have enough space for your combined file in order for that append to succeed. Now, because adding records and respondents is a pretty common function, we're going to walk through that first. So I'm going to go ahead and select a new file here. I happen to have a convenient new respondents file that I will select, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit next on the wizard to essentially go step by step through the process. MarketSight is now uploading the new data file. So we're creating that copy of that original data set, and we're uploading that new data. And when it completes, you should see something like this, where it tells you how many respondents were uploaded with this particular data set. When you click OK, you're then taken into the matching rules section of the Append wizard. Generally speaking, it really doesn't hurt too much to select these checkboxes. You'll see that about halfway down this dialog, we've got a set of numbers here. We have variables that were matched automatically, and I can see a list, of course, of each of these. I have variables that were matched by the rules. This is 0 right now because I haven't selected any of these. And then I have numbers of the unmatched variables remaining in my new and my old data set. The idea, of course, is that I want to see more variables being matched by these rules than I see unmatched variables down below. So again, I'm just going to click on these checkboxes, and if that makes a difference, great. If not, of course, well, not too bad. It's not a problem. We've got an extra step coming up in just a moment where we can accommodate that. Now, when I selected that last one, in my case, that matched quite a few variables, leaving me with just a handful left, and that's great. And again, you can try these different options to see what makes the best sense for your particular data. In this case, you can see that when I clicked on the option to match even if variable codes do not match, that gave me more unmatched variables. So I'm going to leave this back unmatched even if variable labels do not match. Now you may be wondering, as I select these checkboxes, what exactly is MarketSight looking at to match these things? The answer is that it's really looking at pretty much every attribute of the variable. So it's looking at that variable code, it's looking at the variable name or label, it's looking at the values of that variable. How many values does it have? Are they the same values? Are the labels the same for those values? The more changes you make, the more likely it is you're going to have variables that are not matched automatically. The fewer changes you make, the happier you will ultimately be, because of course, more variables will be matched automatically. It's important to keep in mind too that sometimes data formats can play into whether or not a variable matches automatically. Typically, if you're starting with an SPSS dataset, for example, it's easiest to append a second SPSS dataset to that file. You might find that if you use an Excel for that second file, that you'll have more variables that are not matched automatically. Now at this point, since I've selected all of the relevant checkboxes that I can, I now have another important decision to make right here. This guy is easily overlooked because it's at the bottom half of this particular dialog, but it's very important because it's going to make a difference. When I am dealing with unmatched variables, or really any variable that's matched, I need to choose what MarketSight is going to use for the labels and codes. By default, MarketSight's going to have this option selected. The combined variables will use all labels and codes from the new data. This is great if you've made modifications to the data in some way. So perhaps you edited some of those labels. Perhaps the options have changed somewhat. So instead of, say, having "and please write out your response," or something too verbose like that, you have other "please specify." When you make little changes like that, and those are present in your new data set, this is a great choice. On the other hand, there is an option down here to use the combined variables, labels, and codes from the old data set. This is a good choice if you happen to have modified the previous wave of data and made lots of changes to the variable labels in MarketSight. So if you're looking to preserve the changes that you made, again, in the MarketSight application, in that original file, that would be your best bet. Finally, if I have completely unmatched variables, I can also add them as new variables. This happens anyway, so generally it's usually you'll make one of these two choices right here, your selection. All right, moving on to the next page in this dialog. This is the matching or manual matching screen. So if I was not able to get to 0 for unmatched variables, I'm going to then come to this screen in the Append wizard. The idea here is that there have been significant enough changes, so really changes in multiple places, like the numeric value may have changed and the variable code may have changed. When I'm dealing with things like that and MarketSight doesn't automatically match, I, the human, need to specify for the computer application which of these is the accurate match. Now, MarketSight will suggest what it thinks to be a good match. So if I click on business travel here, for example, I can see that business travel per year down here has become bold. This is actually a bit of a shortcut. So if I see that happening, I can actually double-click on that top variable, and that's going to move it over into the matched variable section here. So that's a quick little shortcut there. Otherwise, the typical process is to find your variable, find it in the old data set if it exists, and then click Match here in the middle, which again moves it over to the side. Now at this point, clearly, I still have unmatched variables left in my old data set. That can happen. That's relatively common, of course. Variables may no longer be asked in a new wave of the survey. So in that situation, that's fine to just leave them. There really is nothing to match them with, so I'm simply going to let them be and not worry about them. At this point, when I hit Next, I have several final decisions that I need to make for setting up both my data set as well as the data itself. The first is that I need to choose whether or not I need a wave variable. Now, it may be that you already have a wave variable in your data set. If that's the case, a wave variable would not be needed. MarketSight would not need to make one for you, that is. On the other hand, if you do not have a wave variable present in your data files, and you know that you do need to be able to compare between this wave of data and the old wave of data, then you probably are going to want to create the wave variable here. MarketSight will default to wave 1 and 2, but of course this could be changed to really anything. So let's say my old data was February data, and my new data is March. So I could call this, of course, by quarter, by anything that I need. Finally, I need to make a choice here. Existing crosstabs and data views, and as a result, the charts that are based on them and any dashboards. Should they include both the new and the old data, or one or the other? So depending on preference there. Typically, most common, of course, would be to include both. So I'll leave it on that default setting, and I will hit Next. This is the last step in this process. I am going to now name my data set. All right, and it does need to, of course, be a unique name, and I will hit Finish. That should pop open the tasks list here on the side. Now, while that's processing, a couple of things I do want to show you. The first is that with any data set, you're going to want to be aware of the properties, and this is a good time to look at that. So I'm going to right-click on my Append Starter data set, and that's going to get me the variable properties right here. And in this case, for example, this is handy because I can take a look down here at the very bottom, and I can see that in my original data set, I actually had 617 respondents. Okay? Now, checking on that tasks list again, looks like my append is complete. So I can do that same thing for my new data set, the 62019 with new respondents. So if I right-click on that and select Properties, I'll see that in this case, I now have 1,617 respondents. This, of course, makes sense. It's what I would expect to see, as the file that I added had 1,000 respondents in it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, and cancel out of that. With the data sets, once I've appended, couple of functions that I do want to be aware of within the MarketSight interface, as well as sort of in general. When I append, the nice thing about the way MarketSight works is that, of course, it's actually taking that work that I've done previously. So any charts or crosstabs that were in my start data set, those are automatically carried over into my new data set. And as a result, if they were in key findings, for example, they will automatically update. I can also take dashboards that contain those items, and I can point them to my new data set so that they also show new and updated data. An alternative is to use the data sync function in MarketSight. This one is fairly similar in idea. It essentially adds new respondents. However, it does so automatically for you, depending on the survey platform that you're using. For example, if you use Qualtrics as a survey platform, Data Sync will automatically retrieve new data periodically for you, complete the append, and then all of the work automatically updates for you. So definitely something to think about there. Now, one last thing I do want to point out is the PowerPoint sync function. This is very handy for tracking studies because chances are very good that at some point you went and you exported some PowerPoint charts. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a previously exported file here. Again, this was just one chart. Chances are good you'll probably have quite a few, perhaps an entire deck that you've created for a client. But one thing to keep in mind is that whenever you're working with MarketSight charts, so you've exported them from MarketSight, you've copy, pasted them, you moved them around, you may have edited data, changed different things or attributes, that work can be preserved and the data can be updated after an append. The reason why is that every chart essentially has a unique identifying code associated with it. What this enables MarketSight to do is to create a PowerPoint sync function. Now, switching back into MarketSight here, I can see that I am in my new data set, and I can see that that familiarity by brand chart does exist here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on PowerPoint sync, and I'm going to browse for that file, which I believe should be on my desktop, should be pretty easy to find. And then at this point, I simply need to click OK. MarketSight is going to look for that little bit of code that I pointed out. When it finds a match between what's in my presentation and what's in MarketSight, it then updates that underlying Excel spreadsheet. When that task completes, I will get two things. I will get obviously a new download, as well as a log file, and this is very handy if you have lots of charts, because it will tell you what successfully synced and what did not, in case something changed. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this PowerPoint here. Yep, just open that fellow right on up. All right, I'm going to enable editing there for a moment. So essentially, if I move this over to the side and we grab this guy right there, let's zoom in just a tad on the side here. We can see that ultimately this is the same chart in that same layout, but the data has dramatically changed. So if I scroll up just a tad so that we can see our percentages there, for example, we can see that those numbers are now updated to reflect my most current wave. So definitely handy for tracking studies, especially if your clients really like their PowerPoint decks. Now the other sort of side of the coin, if you will, is the client who is, of course, looking to move into the world of dashboards and really working with findings online. In that case, you can update the data that is shown in a dashboard in MarketSight as well. The trick is to simply go to the dashboards page, and you'll simply want to first select your dashboard, such as this one here, and then simply click on Redirect here in this gray toolbar. What this will allow you to do is simply replace the content, if you will, or redirect the content of either all or selected dashboards to a new data set, so that appended file. I would simply select my old and my new data set and then click OK in order to point that dashboard to the new data. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. So that is a brief overview, if you will, of the append process for adding new records, adding new respondents to a data set. But there is, of course, one other component of append, and that is adding new variables themselves, so new questions. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to essentially at this point, for the sake of example, start with my starter data set again, and I'm going to begin in a similar fashion. I'm going to choose to append data, but this time I'm going to choose to add variables. As before, I'm going to browse for my file, so in this case that is my new variables file, as you might have guessed, and then I simply click on Next to proceed to the next step. The adding variables wizard is definitely a little bit different. What we'll find is that I don't have quite as many screens to go through, but the screens are still important to pay attention to. Now in this case it's telling me that it uploaded new data. Great. This is though the most important screen here when I'm adding new variables. I'll see that in my leftmost upper column here I have variables that are excluded from the combined data set. Now this may seem confusing, but really it's not too bad. You may be wondering, how can I be excluding a respondent ID? The answer is I'm really not. If I take a look at the right-hand upper window here in the combined data set, it lists files that are being added, but it also will show variables that are in the data set. In this case, respondent ID is present there. What MarketSight is trying to tell me here is that I already have a copy of respondent ID. I don't need to add a second variable with the same name for that to my data set. It's already present. So although that may seem confusing, that's what's going on there. It's just trying to, of course, keep me to a single respondent ID column in this case. Now for the new variables, of course, that's fine. What I want to make sure that I do is take a look at the bottom half here. I will see data that has, I should say, variables that have the same codes and same labels, as long as they're in both the new and the old data set. I should see them here. So respondent ID is, in this case, my single variable that is present in both data set files. Now, the reason why I do want something like this 9 times out of 10 is because this is what enables me to match records. So if respondents from my previous data set answered these new questions, I can align those records appropriately, but only if I have a variable like respondent ID that I can use to match records on by dragging it over to the right. A consideration when dealing with a respondent ID sort of variable is that you want to make sure that all of the values contained within a single data set are unique. Now, of course, it's okay if there are matches between the old data set and the new data set. How else would you match up records? But within the same data set, so within, say, the old data set, we don't want to have 2 rows that have the same code in respondent ID. In that case, it's no longer a unique match, and MarketSight will not be able to complete the append process here because I've told it to match, but it can't due to the lack of unique variable values. So definitely make sure that you're dealing with unique values in your matching variable. Now, on the other hand, if you have no matching variable, or you just can't use it because there are, say, blanks or there are other duplicates, you could choose to add the unmatched records as new records. You do want to be careful with this option, as of course, if you can't assure that the new records are in the correct order, well, that's important to know. So just be careful with that, but it is a choice that you can make. As before, I'll go ahead and hit next, and I will get to add my variables once I finish giving my new data set a name. All right, so I'll say finish, and again, that should pop up the tasks list on the side. While that's going, I'm going to take a look again at my properties just to check that count here. So in my original data set, my variables, I had 92 of those guys. And let's see here, it looks like my append is complete in this case. So I'm going to check the properties for my new data set. And I can see that now I happen to have 102. So I've added new variables to this file. All right. So appending new variables. Now, there are situations where this can seem to become quite complex. Perhaps you have a new data set that is a mix both of variables and respondents. Perhaps you have a data set that is both old and new respondents. Whenever you're dealing with complex situations like that, you have to consider whether or not it is easier to append or to upload the new data set and then do an import. Which is better, again, depends on the content of those new files. If you're dealing with something that is generally just new respondents, the append is probably preferred. Again, if it's generally just new variables, append is preferred. But on the other hand, if it is a mix, or as said previously, you have both new and old respondents, the new upload and then import is probably the best bet. Essentially, you would simply upload your data set as a new file, you might have guessed that, but then you would select the import button here. That's what's going to allow you to copy over work that you've done. So any work that you did in the previous version of the data set can be copied over as well. All right, so it looks like we've gone through the 2 major modes of appending here, and we're going to take a moment to check the questions that we have in the chat here. All right, so I can see quite a few. First question that we have related to append, if you click on View Examples on the Matching Rules screen, does it show actual examples from your data set or just hypothetical examples? That's an excellent question. So essentially, when you are doing an append, and this shouldn't take too long, so I'll just append data again, MarketSight, depending on where you click, will show either examples that are hypothetical examples or they will show things from your current data set. So let's say, for example, I am appending completely new respondents. MarketSight thinks through that, and when I get to that matching screen, I'll show you the 2 differences here. All right. So the first links that you see, view examples, these are going to be hypotheticals. So this is just sort of an idea, or to give you an idea, of the kinds of changes that would have been made, and then ultimately what the combined variable would look like. So different options there. However, if you're looking at the view list examples right here, these are in fact from your data sets. So these will list exact variables from your file. Okay? All right, let's take a look at some of the other questions here. All right. Will the append feature work if you've set up everything with a preliminary file that doesn't have all of the cases, and if you want to replace the preliminary data set with a final data set? Okay, sure. So the question is, of course, I may want to get started ahead of time by working with essentially a data set that's more or less, full of dummy data, maybe just a handful of fake respondents. You could really go either way with a question like this. You could do an append, but you do need to keep in mind, append is not going to remove those dummy respondents. So if you do append, that's fine. You just want to make sure that you utilize the data views to edit the data and remove those extra dummy respondents from that preliminary data set. The other option in that case, when you get your complete data set, is to do an upload with new and then utilize that import function again to bring over the work. So depending on your preferences, either approach will function. All right, next question that we have here. If we create a wave variable now with wave 2, what would happen if we try to add wave 3 later on? Will it use the already created variable from the old data, or try to create another new wave variable? MarketSight will use the wave variable that was already created. So you should find that wave 3 gets added to that same wave variable. So it shouldn't multiply wave variables on you. You'll just have the one to deal with. All right, next question. Normally, I have to rename variables in new SPSS datasets to match old datasets before combining. It looks like the append process prevents the need for this even if the value codes have changed. Is that correct? It can be. So the question really is how many changes ultimately have been made. The more things you change, the less likely it is that things will automatically be matched with the matching rules. If you've just changed a few things, so even if the value codes, for example, if those have been the only things that have changed, yeah, I would say append would work for that. The matching rules should take effect and they should match those variables automatically. But on the other hand, if you changed, for example, the variable label, the value codes, and the value labels, that's 3 different things, 3 different attributes in one variable. In that case, it's probably not going to be automatically matched, and you're going to have to do a manual match. Of course, that's still possible, but something to keep in mind is that generally speaking, you don't want to do too much manual matching if you can avoid it. Of course, that's human intervention, so possibilities for error then increase the more I do that. But I also want to keep in mind, too, that the matching dialog does not really have a save function, as it were. So I can't pause while I'm doing matching and come back to it later. I need to finish it at that point. So therefore, I don't really want to sit there and match hundreds of variables unless I absolutely have to. So as a summary for question number 4 then, again, that's going to be maybe. It should, but again, it ultimately depends on how many changes you've made. All right, next question that we have regarding append. Is there a limit to how many files can be appended to a data set? And the answer really is no. The major limit that you will typically encounter when appending is one of 2 things. So the first is that you may not have enough size free in your entire account for the combined file. Now, that's not really a function of the number of variables so much as it is simply the size of the file overall in that combined file. So that is a limit you might hit. The other are the dataset limits themselves. So each individual dataset, if I click on help, that would be helpful. Each individual dataset will have dataset parameters or limits that do need to be, I guess, adhered to, even with Append. You can always find those by going to Datasets and then Dataset Formats and Size Settings here in the Help documentation. If I take a look down here, for example, I can see that in an enterprise level account, I can have up to 10,000 variables. So I can keep on appending until I hit 10,000. At that point, once I hit 10,001, the append will not proceed because I've exceeded that limit on the data set. But most of the time, most folks don't have 10,000 variables unless you're working with really, really large data sets, so you're probably going to be just fine. All right, just checking out to see if we have any other questions related to Append that we can answer for everyone. All right, we've got a couple of others. Can we merge files together? So two MarketSight data sets, can we merge those together? Right now, the answer is no. So right now, you do need to have one file online, such as my starter data set here, and then one file offline, so saved onto my computer, for example, or a hard drive. In that case, I can then add that data set. But right now, it is not possible to combine, say, my new respondents file here by adding it to a Append starter data set within the MarketSight interface. That's, however, a great idea, so we'll definitely bring that up with the engineering team. All right, a couple of other questions. Is it possible to apply a different weight variable to each wave of data? Now, weighting can be far more complex, so one thing to consider is that it's only possible to have one weight variable per crosstab. So perhaps that's a question that we'll follow up with in greater detail offline. All right, final question that we've got here. If we append additional respondents, will MarketSight remove duplicate entries? All right, excellent question there. MarketSight will not remove duplicates. This is why we typically suggest or recommend that you append a file that simply has new respondents in that data set. If you're dealing, again, with a situation where there might be duplication, there might be some old respondents in there too, you're probably going to want to consider the upload and then import workflow. All right, excellent. That looks like that's the majority of our append-related questions here. So thank you for attending our training today on appending within MarketSight. We really do appreciate your time today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can either reach out to us directly or you can reach out to customer service at MarketSight.com. And of course, we'll be happy to help you with any append or other question you might have. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.